I remember that night with a clarity I can't shake, even years later, as if the memory has etched itself into my skin. I'd babysat for the Harper family dozens of times before, so when their call came in the dead of night, my phone ringing sharp and urgent, I didn't hesitate. They sounded panicked, voices trembling as they asked me to come immediately. Driving up the narrow, winding road to their house, I felt the first twinge of unease, a prickle I had learned to trust. The trees leaned in on either side, their long limbs scratching against the car like skeletal fingers, and the night seemed to swallow my headlights, the darkness thick and heavy. By the time I parked in the driveway, my stomach had tightened, though I tried to shake it off as nerves. After all, it was just babysitting, right? The house looked ordinary from the outside, bathed in the weak glow of porch lights. But stepping inside, I immediately felt wrongness settle over me. The air was colder than it should have been, and the familiar scent of baked cookies and laundry seemed faint, almost suffocated. The floorboards groaned under my weight in ways they never had before, and for a fleeting second, it felt as though they were alive, whispering warnings in a language I couldn't understand. I called out softly, announcing myself, my voice catching in my throat as the silence answered back. The living room was empty. The couch cushions were in place, toys scattered neatly on the rug, but the crib was empty. The baby monitor on the counter crackled with static before I could even reach for it. A low hiss that rose and fell like a whisper in a windless room. Then, almost imperceptibly, I thought I heard voices. Childlike, soft, muttering indistinct words. I froze, pressing my hand to my mouth to keep from screaming, straining to hear over the rising thrum of my own heartbeat. I checked every corner of the living room, lifting cushions, peeking behind furniture, calling the child's name in a low, steady voice. Nothing. The voices seemed to retreat when I focused on them, as though they were teasing me, slipping just out of reach. I moved toward the kitchen, the light flickering overhead, throwing everything into intermittent shadow. For a moment, I saw a dark shape shift in the reflection of the refrigerator, a movement that didn't belong. My chest tightened. I spun around, half expecting to find the child standing behind me, giggling, but the room was empty. I told myself it was a trick of the light, an imagination fueled by fear, but the instinct to run screamed louder. My eyes darted to the stairs leading up to the bedrooms, where a sudden, deafening slam of a door made me jump and stumble back. Every rational thought told me to call the police, to leave, but something held me there, rooted to the spot. I climbed the stairs, each step deliberate, heart hammering in my ears. The hall stretched out, darker than it should have been, shadows pooling in the corners, swallowing the familiar. I reached the baby's room and pushed the door open. The crib was empty. I blinked, trying to reconcile my memory of leaving her asleep hours ago with this sterile, untouched scene. Then came the giggle, faint but distinct, a high, almost musical sound that seemed to reverberate from the walls themselves. I spun around, expecting to see someone, anything, but there was nothing. Just silence. I called out her name again, my voice shaking now, echoing down the hall. I could feel the hair on my arms standing on end, a heatless chill crawling across my skin. I remember the sense of being watched, that creeping dread that makes you want to curl into yourself, yet compels you to move forward. I stepped further into the hall, eyes scanning the corners, the shadows, the closed doors. Nothing. And yet I could feel it, the weight of attention, the sensation that every movement I made was mirrored, observed. Time became a strange thing after that. Minutes seemed like hours, every creak, groan, and sigh magnified, every faint noise a possible threat. I tried to ground myself, telling myself it had to be rational, that maybe a window had rattled in the wind or a loose shutter slammed outside. But the static from the baby monitor persisted, the whispers crawling back into my ears, teasing and mocking. My hands shook as I reached for the monitor, flipping it off and on, but the voices remained. I moved from room to room, calling her name, lifting blankets, checking behind every piece of furniture. The kitchen again, flickering light, shadows that moved just beyond the corners of my eyes. I felt like I was in a loop, a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run into the safety of the cold night outside. But something, I can't say what, kept me tethered to the house. Then came the sound from downstairs, subtle at first, almost drowned out by my own panicked breathing. The soft patter of tiny footsteps, running, darting across the floor. I froze, straining to hear, heart thudding painfully in my chest. They stopped abruptly, then there was silence. And then, the creak of a door opening slowly, deliberately from the basement. I hadn't even realized the Harpers had a basement. A sick knot formed in my stomach. I backed toward the stairs, unsure if I should descend or flee. The giggle came again, closer now, almost at my shoulder. But when I spun, again, nothing. I could feel tears forming, stinging my eyes as the realization sank in that the house was no longer familiar. Every shadow felt alive, every sound deliberate. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but my voice refused to carry. Hours, or maybe minutes, I can't be certain, passed in that suspended state of fear. I sat in the living room, eyes wide, clutching the monitor, listening to the silence and the occasional static, waiting for the impossible to reveal itself. I felt a presence in every corner, behind every closed door, a weight pressing on my chest. The house seemed to breathe, the air heavy with the memory of something unseen. When the Harpers finally arrived, rushing in with frantic apologies and worried faces, I could barely form words. The house looked normal again, ordinary, safe. The lights worked. The crib was back in place with the baby sleeping peacefully inside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in that house with me that night. Something that had been patient, observing, and playing its own cruel game. I've never babysat for the Harpers again. I don't drive down that road at night, and even now when I hear the faint creak of a floorboard or a whisper in the wind, I can't help but think of that night. Of the way the shadows moved just out of sight, the way the static whispered, and the way a giggle, soft and chilling, can make a house feel like it belongs to someone else entirely. Even typing this now, I can feel that same prickling dread. The memory of being alone in a house where the walls themselves seemed alive, where every corner could hide the impossible, and where the familiar became unrecognizable. The fear didn't end when the Harpers returned. It stayed with me, a shadow I carry, a quiet, patient reminder that some nights should never be revisited. That night, I learned that fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, persistent, patient, and unseen. It waits, watches, and when you least expect it, it reminds you how small, how alone you really are. Even now, I wonder if that house ever truly let go of me, or if it still remembers my presence, tucked away in the shadows, waiting for the next careless step. I had babysat for the Reynolds twins a few times before, and I thought this night would be simple. Their parents had gone to some dinner gathering in town, leaving me alone in the old house perched at the edge of the forest. It was one of those houses where every creak of the floor feels louder than it should, where the wind weaving through the surrounding pines makes the walls whisper, and even familiar spaces can feel strange. The house was quiet when I arrived, the smell of wood smoke and old varnish hanging faintly in the air, and the twins were already asleep in their shared bedroom upstairs. I remember feeling the calm settling over me as I flipped through the channels on the old living room TV, the static on the screen blending into the soft sighing of the house. Then it began, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps pacing the upstairs hall. At first I thought it was my imagination. Old houses make noises, floorboards shift, heating systems groan, but these weren't the random creaks of settling timber. They had a rhythm, a presence, like someone walking with purpose. My stomach tightened, a low, crawling sense of dread settling over me. I whispered the twins' names softly, imagining one of them had woken, but only silence answered back. The footsteps stopped abruptly outside their bedroom door. My pulse shot, and I froze, unable to move, every nerve screaming at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the carpet. I peeked around the corner of the stairwell, but the hall was empty, stretching on in that familiar way, long and dim under the pale glow of the nightlight. I told myself it had to be nothing. The wind rattling a window or a loose floorboard. My mind ran over every rational explanation, trying to anchor me. But every creak made me jump. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls. The air had grown colder, heavier, as though the house itself was inhaling and holding its breath. Then came the sound of a door slamming upstairs. Not a creak, not a gentle click, but a sudden final bang that rattled through my chest. I bolted for the stairs, grabbing my phone from the living room table as if it were a lifeline. My hands slick with sweat, my teeth clenched against the rising panic. The hallway stretched endlessly as I climbed, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The twins' bedroom door stood closed, and I could feel that same presence lingering just beyond it, something patient, watching, moving with the quiet patience of a predator. I pressed my ear to the door, hearing nothing at first, then a faint scuff of movement, so soft I thought I might be imagining it. I backed away slowly, heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run out into the night and never look back. But the thought of leaving the children alone in whatever had entered the house kept me rooted, paralyzed in a different sort of fear. I remember reaching the living room again to grab a flashlight from the drawer. The house had shifted somehow, the shadows longer, darker, heavier. The wind pressed against the windows with a low moan, rattling panes and making them thrum like the strings of some giant unseen instrument. I crept upstairs again, holding the flashlight like a talisman, illuminating slivers of hall carpet, the wooden banister, the tops of doors, but never the source. The steps were soft now, circling, pacing, slow, deliberate, just beyond the reach of the light. I could feel eyes on me. I could almost hear a quiet exhale following my every movement. I tried to whisper the twins' names again, this time with a tremor in my voice. Silence answered, yet the pacing continued, pressing into me, the rhythm of the footsteps settling deep into my chest. My mind raced with every rational explanation. Family members sneaking in for a prank, a wandering neighbor, but nothing fit. The house was isolated, tucked into the Appalachian mountains with no one for miles. The forest pressed up against the backyard, dark and endless. If someone had come here, they had come through the woods, unseen, and I hadn't heard a thing. A gust rattled the front door, and I jumped, spinning to the other end of the hall. The shadows seemed to twitch, crawling along the walls, thickening in the corners. And then it happened, a bedroom door, one I didn't recognize, banged open upstairs. Not the twins, not the one I had been guarding, just a door further down the hall, swinging wide as if pushed by invisible hands. I ran, clutching my phone and trying not to scream. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment I saw a dark shape standing just inside the doorway. It was still, unmoving, and then gone. My chest felt tight, every breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The night stretched out around me. I could hear the forest pressing in against the house, the low hiss of the wind through the trees like whispers in some forgotten language. The footsteps had stopped now, replaced by an oppressive silence that weighed on me as I climbed the stairs one last time, trying to see every inch of the hall. I pressed myself against the wall, peering into every doorway, every shadowed corner. Still nothing, yet the sense of being watched didn't leave me. It clung to my skin, a low vibration running under my ribs as if the house itself had eyes. Hours or perhaps minutes passed. The twins slept through it, oblivious, and I could only sit in the dim light, rocking back and forth, listening for anything, imagining everything. My mind tried to rationalize, to tell me that the pacing, the slamming doors, the shadows, all of it was some combination of nerves, wind, and an old house playing tricks. But deep down I knew it wasn't imagination. Something had been there, in the hallway, walking, watching, and waiting. By the time the parents returned, I was a trembling wreck. They opened the front door to find me pale, shaking, gripping my phone like a lifeline. I tried to explain, but the words faltered, and I could see in their eyes that they didn't fully believe me. And I suppose they couldn't. They hadn't seen what I hadn't felt the heavy weight of presence following me, the unnatural rhythm of steps that had echoed through the halls. The house looked normal again, familiar, safe. But I knew better. That night, the shadows had stretched further than they should have. The walls had watched, and the footsteps had marked my nerves, leaving me raw and twitching long after they disappeared. Even now I can't forget it. Driving past that house in daylight, everything looks normal. The sun glints off the windows, the wind rustles the trees, children play in the yard. But when night falls, I think of those soft, deliberate footsteps pacing outside the twins' bedroom, stopping, starting, circling, patient. I can hear the quiet creaks of the floorboards as if they're calling my name, and I remember the paralyzing sense of being watched in a place that should have been safe. The house is still there, quiet, waiting, and sometimes I wonder if whatever followed me that night is still inside, still pacing, still listening for the next set of footsteps to echo back through the hallway. I never babysat for the Reynolds family again. I can't drive up that road without my stomach nodding, without feeling that same patient gaze pressing down from the shadows. I've told myself it was my nerves, the wind, old floorboards, but every instinct, every memory tells me that night wasn't just fear. It was real. Something had been there. Something had walked those halls, deliberate and silent, and it hasn't left. Even when I sleep, I think I hear the soft, patient footsteps pacing just beyond my door, stopping abruptly and waiting. Waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to remember that some houses are never empty, and some footsteps never truly stop. I remember walking into the Reynolds living room that evening, expecting nothing more than a quiet night with Mia, the 6-year-old who always had some doll or stuffed animal clutched in her tiny arms. Her parents had left for a late dinner, the door clicking shut behind them, leaving me alone in the soft hum of the old Appalachian house. The smell of pine and wood polish hung faintly in the air, mixed with the faint trace of laundry detergent from the twins' rooms. Everything looked ordinary. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I made my way to the twins' bedroom, expecting to find them asleep, tucked in as always. But it was Mia's own room I lingered in, the one she decorated with stuffed animals and dolls. That's when I noticed it, a new doll, sitting perfectly upright on her bed, porcelain face cracked delicately, eyes staring straight at me. I paused, unsure if it had been there before, though I could have sworn it wasn't. At first, I laughed softly, thinking Mia had simply gotten a new toy, the kind that sometimes creeps me out a little in the dim light. But as I turned toward her to tuck the blankets, I heard it. My name, whispered softly, almost a breath against my ear. I froze. My pulse spiked and I slowly turned back to the doll. Its head hadn't moved, but the whisper came again, slightly clearer this time, carrying the weight of a voice that didn't belong to the child asleep in the corner. I leaned in, telling myself I was imagining it, that the long, quiet night and the creaking house were playing tricks on my mind. But the whisper persisted, quiet, deliberate, repeating my name, coaxing, almost taunting me. I reached for the doll, intending to set it aside or put it down on the dresser, but as soon as my fingers touched it, it slipped back onto the bed, upright, as if no one had moved it. My stomach twisted. I glanced at Mia, still curled beneath the blankets, breathing softly in sleep, the innocent rise and fall of her chest doing nothing to reassure me. The whispers grew louder now, forming fragments of words, warnings, mockery. I told myself it must be Mia playing some kind of elaborate prank, but the child had been asleep for hours, and no one else was in the house. The room felt smaller, tighter, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. Every creak of the floor sounded closer, heavier, as if someone or something was circling just beyond my sight. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I had to focus on the baby monitor, on keeping Mia safe. But the whispers persisted, growing into sentences I could barely comprehend. "Don't leave," it said. Or maybe, "You're alone now." Sometimes it sounded like my name interlaced with the syllables, each syllable dragging across the room like a fingernail on wood. I backed up slowly, heart hammering, flashlight trembling in my hand. I remember pacing the room, trying to convince myself it was the wind or a loose vent, or the house settling in the Appalachian night. But the weight in the air was tangible, oppressive. The doll stayed in the center of the bed, eyes fixed on me, unblinking, patient. I could feel it, though, in ways that made me shiver, the sense that it had followed me, not physically, but in thought, in perception. Every corner I checked, every shadow I examined, seemed to harbor the same quiet observation. I wanted to leave, to flee into the cold night. But the thought of Mia alone, or the idea of acknowledging the impossibility of what I was hearing, kept me tethered to the room. Hours, or it could have been minutes. Time lost all meaning, passed with me sitting at the edge of Mia's bed, eyes darting, listening. The whispers continued intermittently, fading and returning like a tide, rising and falling with deliberate patience. The wind pressed against the windows, rattling the panes, but the sound of my own breathing, the low hum of the heating pipes, and the whispers of that porcelain voice dominated the night. My hands shook as I tried to pick up the doll again, to inspect it, to prove to myself that nothing could be alive in such a small, delicate thing. But the second my fingers brushed its cracked cheek, it returned to the bed, upright and unmoving, the eyes staring into mine with impossible patience. I tried speaking aloud, asking it what it wanted, telling it to leave, telling myself I was imagining things, that it was simply a toy, inert and harmless. But the voice grew clearer, more insistent, forming syllables and short phrases that seemed intended to unsettle me, to make me question everything. I could feel its attention pressing on me, each word wrapping around my mind like smoke. I tried to tell myself that it was just a sound carried by the creaking boards, the wind through the trees outside, the pipes in the walls, but deep down I knew otherwise. Something about it was deliberate, patient, intelligent. By the middle of the night, I could feel exhaustion setting in, but I could not leave. I was trapped in that room with the doll, listening to whispers that I could no longer distinguish from my own thoughts. I remember the sensation most vividly, a crawling, invasive feeling, as though the doll had somehow found a way into my mind, pressing, prodding, following me in every glance and movement. I tried standing, tried leaving the room for a moment only to return and find it upright on the bed, staring, waiting, unyielding. The shadows stretched across the room as if alive. The corners seemed darker than they had before, the soft rustle of the curtains like fingers brushing across unseen surfaces. My chest felt tight, my limbs weak with fear and disbelief, and through it all that voice, whispering, taunting, patient. It seemed to know when I moved, when I tried to distract myself, when I forced my eyes elsewhere. The house, the night, the walls, they all became secondary to that one tiny porcelain figure. At some point, I sat on the floor, back against the wall, flashlight in hand, staring at it. The whispers had stopped for a moment and silence pressed in on me. I remember thinking, maybe if I close my eyes and wait, it will go away. But the instant I blinked, I felt the pressure return, that same sensation of being watched, pursued, possessed. I could almost see the whisper forming in the air, curling around my ears, tugging at my thoughts, playing with my perception of reality. The minutes dragged into hours, though I cannot tell you how long. Morning light crept over the mountains, spilling into the room through blinds. I thought finally that it would be gone, that with the sun it would vanish like a bad dream. But when I looked at the bed, the doll remained, staring, cracked face, lifeless eyes, patient and unmoving. I could not tell if it had left when I blinked, or if it had ever truly moved at all. But I knew, as I gathered Mia in my arms and walked to the front door, that it had left something inside me, a residue of dread, a patient, quiet presence that would follow me even outside the house. I told the parents nothing beyond the basics. They laughed, chiding me for being jumpy, for imagining things. But I knew better. That night, the house and its occupants had been ordinary, yes, but the doll had been patient. It had watched, waited, and insinuated itself into my mind. Even now, years later, I feel the memory creeping into my thoughts. The whisper of a name in the wind, the tiny, impossible pressure of being observed, reminding me that some things can occupy space without being seen, that some presences are patient, and that some nights in Appalachia are too quiet, too still. For comfort, I never returned for another babysitting job at that house. I avoided the road, avoided thinking about the room, but the memory lingers in the quiet moments before sleep, when shadows gather and the world feels thinner, as if the house and the doll are still waiting somewhere, whispering my name softly, patiently, from the corner of perception. Even writing this now, I can feel it, a subtle invasive weight, reminding me that there are things that do not belong to the world of logic and reason, that wait in the cracks of the night for a mind to intrude upon, and that some toys are never truly toys at all. I remember that night like it was stretched thin over hours, though in truth it may have been only minutes before the dread settled over the living room like a cold, wet blanket. I was sitting with little Sam trying to distract him with cartoons, the flickering screen throwing long shadows across the walls of the old Appalachian house. The wind pressed against the windows, rattling the panes, and the old timbers groaned with the subtle motion of the night. Everything seemed ordinary, too ordinary, and then I noticed the figure standing outside the window. At first I waved, assuming it was a neighbor, a passing soul familiar to the holler, but the figure didn't move. It didn't blink, didn't adjust its stance, didn't respond in any way. My stomach dropped. a heavy leaden feeling as I realized its eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, unrelenting. I felt the cold press of fear through my chest, sharp and insistent. I tried to keep Sam engaged with the cartoon, pointing at the screen and keeping my own voice calm, though my hands shook on the remote. The figure remained. Its face, pressed close to the glass, or so it seemed, was hard to make out in the shadows, but the sense of being observed was immediate, intimate. The hairline of its shadow pressed against the pane like some living etching, its features inscrutable yet familiar enough in their attention that my skin crawled. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, loud and insistent, matching the silent rhythm of that unseen gaze. I considered closing the blinds, but some irrational part of me couldn't. I couldn't look away. I crept closer, pretending to check the thermostat or adjust the TV, but every step I took I could feel the eyes following me. I whispered to Sam to keep his eyes on the screen, and he obeyed, clutching his blanket tightly, unaware of the presence outside. I debated calling the parents, but the phone was upstairs, and every instinct told me the figure wouldn't wait for me to rationalize. I finally grabbed the cordless, my hand shaking, and ran to the kitchen where the signal was strongest. As I dialed, I risked a glance back, and it had vanished. My shoulders slumped with relief, though it was fleeting. I had barely gotten the first ring out when movement at another window caught my eye. There it was again, the same figure now standing at the side window, watching silently, impossibly still, and impossibly close. I hung up before anyone picked up. There was no one I could call to make sense of this. The night pressed down around me, every groan of the house amplified, every tree branch scraping against the siding sounding like deliberate knocks. The figure remained, a patient watcher, shifting slightly with the darkened glass to keep its presence known without ever revealing too much. My hands trembled as I grabbed Sam and led him toward the back of the house, trying to keep him calm, whispering about the cartoons and bedtime, anything to distract from the unblinking gaze. The figure did not follow in any way I could see, but the pressure of it lingered, a weight pressing on my skin and inside my chest. I tried to reason. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe some local wanderer, someone who had been seen around the holler before. Maybe it had been outside the whole time, standing in the shadows, observing, testing me. My mind cycled through every story I'd ever heard of feral people, of drifters who disappeared into the forests and came back only to vanish again. The Appalachian woods were vast, stretching around the house like a wall, offering cover and secrecy. I could almost imagine someone navigating those trees and shadows with ease, silent and patient, living just beyond reach and understanding. The house itself seemed to close in, the walls and ceilings pressing against me with the pressure of isolation. Minutes passed, or hours. I cannot tell which, but every sound became a signal, every rustle of leaves or distant animal cry a possible indication of the figure moving closer. I checked the windows again, slowly, careful not to startle Sam, and the corners of my vision seemed crowded with movement, hints of shadow that vanished when I looked directly. My heart hammered like a drum, the sound echoing in the hollow spaces of the house. The wind had picked up now, rattling the old clapboard and shaking loose pine needles across the porch, but the figure remained immobile, pressing its silent insistence into the night. I could feel it as keenly as the chill on my skin, a presence more felt than seen, patient and deliberate. I moved around the living room cautiously, keeping Sam close, whispering reassurance to him, but my own voice sounded strange, foreign, swallowed by the oppressive silence the figure seemed to command. I tried the front door, checking locks, peering through the peephole, but the night looked empty. Still, I could feel it watching, somehow inside the space around us, threading through the darkness, measuring, judging, waiting. Every instinct screamed to leave, to take Sam and run down the road, but the thought of tripping on the old stairs, of frightening him, of being caught unaware in the dark, held me in place. The figure had all the patience of the mountains themselves, slow, deliberate, and absolute. I settled into a corner of the living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Sam eventually drifted into a fitful sleep on the couch, blankets pulled tight, trusting me implicitly even as I trembled beside him. The figure moved, or maybe it didn't, but I could see its presence flicker in the reflection of the window panes, shifting just enough to remind me it had not gone, that it had been observing the entire time. I felt every second stretch, my awareness narrowing to the unblinking eyes beyond the glass, the shadows curling like smoke in the corners of the room. By the time the parents returned, the night had stretched into something tangible, heavy, as though the air itself remembered what had happened. They opened the door, surprised to find me pale, shaking, holding Sam close, and I could not fully explain. The windows were empty, ordinary, reflecting nothing but the dim glow of the porch lights. I tried to laugh it off, to speak lightly, but my voice faltered, and I could see in their faces that they could not comprehend the tension I carried. Yet even as they ushered me out, I felt it lingering, patient, implacable. The figure, the gaze, the watchfulness that had pressed into the edges of my mind. Refusing to let go, I have never babysat at that house again. I avoid the roads nearby, the forest edges, the houses tucked into valleys where the dark seems to hold shape and intention. And yet, even now, sometimes when the wind rattles my windows at night, I swear I see a dark figure in the corner of my vision, still patient, still watching, still unblinking. The house may appear ordinary in the light of day, the windows empty, the trees just trees, but the memory of being observed, truly and fully observed, does not fade. It presses on me, a weight in the chest, a chill in the skin, a quiet Appalachian dread that lingers long after the doors are locked and the night has passed. Even writing this, I can feel it, patient and waiting somewhere outside perception. A reminder that not all who move through the mountains are bound by sight or distance, that some eyes follow with an almost human patience, and that some nights in Appalachia are heavy enough to carry the memory of being watched into daylight, where it hides quietly, waiting for the next time you let your guard down. The first time I babysat at the Montgomery house, they gave me the usual warnings, the bedrooms, the kitchen, where the extra blankets were. But one instruction stood out clearly: never go into the basement. I nodded, understanding that a lot of parents were cautious about old basements, locked doors, and creaking stairs, and I didn't think much of it. I assumed the locks were there for safety reasons, or maybe it was just where the Montgomerys stored things they didn't want disturbed. The house itself was the kind that felt alive with age. The floors creaked in familiar patterns, the wind whistled around corners and through gaps in the siding, and the shadows moved strangely under the old gas lamps. That night, I arrived with the children tucked into bed and the quiet of the Appalachian holler pressing against the windows. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and dust, a comforting combination that I thought would make a normal evening pass without incident. But curiosity is a slow, gnawing thing. I first noticed it when I heard the softest sound, almost imperceptible at first. A faint crying, low and muffled, coming from somewhere below the floorboards. I froze, heart tightening. My first thought was that it must be the TV downstairs, some neighbor's program carrying through the walls, or perhaps a trick of the old house settling. But the sound persisted, irregular, quiet, unmistakably human, unmistakably small. It came from the direction of the basement door. The warning not to enter flared in my mind, but the sound was persistent, insistent, tugging at the edge of my attention. I found myself approaching the locked basement door, rationalizing as I went. Maybe a neighbor's child had wandered in, maybe a pet trapped downstairs, maybe even one of the Montgomery children playing a prank. When I reached the door, I noticed something impossible. The bolt, always firmly secured, was slightly ajar. My fingers trembled as I reached for the edge of the door, pressing my ear to the cold wood. The crying grew louder, closer, and I could feel the chill radiating through the doorway, cold enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just a draft. The air felt heavy, suffocating, filled with an unnatural density that seemed to push against me. I pulled the door open just a crack, peering into the darkness. There was nothing I could see, only black shadows pooling along the low ceiling. The faint outline of the staircase descending into some kind of forgotten hollow beneath the house. And then I noticed the footprints. Tiny, childlike, impossibly small footprints leading from the basement and stopping abruptly at the threshold, fading into nothing. My heart thumped painfully, each beat echoing in my skull. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the dim light, or the angle of the lamps above, but something about their placement felt deliberate, as though someone or something had stepped carefully, aware I was watching. The crying continued, but now it had an edge, an urgency that made my stomach twist. I backed away instinctively, the floorboards groaning under the motion, and the sound seemed to respond, ebbing slightly before rising again. I debated calling the parents, trying to explain the sound, but my voice felt caught in my throat. Even my own rational explanations sounded hollow, like I was trying to talk myself out of something that had already happened. I couldn't see anyone, and yet the sense of presence was undeniable. Shadows shifted across the walls, as if the house itself was breathing, stretching and contracting in rhythm with the cry that echoed from below. I took a step closer again, my curiosity fighting the gnawing fear, and the air grew colder, sharper, filled with the smell of damp earth and mildew that the house had never smelled like before. It was as though the basement had existed outside the world of the living, untouched and secret, and now it was aware of me. I reached out a hand, pressing it against the door, almost against my better judgment, and the crying stopped abruptly. Silence pressed in so thickly that I could hear my own blood pumping. I thought I had imagined it, and relief almost overtook the fear, but then the small scuffing sound of footsteps against wood echoed up the staircase. Not human in pace, not familiar in rhythm, but deliberate, precise, and insistent. I stumbled back, bumping into the wall, and the air seemed to close in on me, pressing tight against my chest. The shadows pooled more densely at the edges of the room, and every instinct told me to leave, to get out before I confirmed what I feared. But somehow I couldn't move. Curiosity, dread, and disbelief tangled into a paralyzing knot. Minutes, or maybe seconds, I could not tell, stretched into eternity. I dared to glance back at the basement door. The bolt was now fully closed again, as if no one had been there at all, as if the small footprints had never existed. The air had warmed slightly, the oppressive chill retreating into ordinary evening coolness. Yet the memory, the sound of the cry, the impossible weight of the darkness pressed on me like a tangible thing. I wanted to rationalize, to explain it, but my mind refused to settle. It was there. It had been there. And somehow, even when it was gone, it remained. By the time the parents returned, everything was in place. The basement door was locked firmly this time, and the house looked ordinary. I did not mention the cry, the footprints, or the chilling air. Words could not do justice to what I had felt. I merely smiled, pale and shaken, claiming a quiet evening with the children, and gathered my things to leave. The parents thanked me, unaware of the tension still coiled tight in my chest. Even after leaving, I felt the presence linger. I could sense it in the empty spaces, in the corners of rooms, in the way shadows pooled strangely where light should have dominated. The memory of the basement, the crying, the impossible footprints, and the cold air pressing against me stayed with me for days. I would awaken in the night, convinced I heard soft footsteps below, or faint cries carried on the Appalachian wind. I never returned to babysit for the Montgomerys again. The memory of that basement, locked and forbidding, carved itself into my mind, a quiet dread that refused to leave. Years later, I drive past that road occasionally. The house looks ordinary in daylight, the windows bright with sunlight, the front porch welcoming. But the memory presses against me in ways that reason cannot erase. I know that below the house, behind the locked door, something, human or not, waits, patient and deliberate, unhurried by the passage of time. It has no reason to hurry. It existed long before I arrived, and it will remain long after, a quiet, immutable presence. I have told myself over and over that it was my imagination, that the long night, the creaking house, the isolation of the Appalachian forest played tricks on me. But the footprints were real. The cry was real. The oppressive cold, the impossible weight in the air, all of it was real. And every so often, when the wind whistles through my windows, I feel that same pressing weight, that same quiet insistence, as if the basement remembers me, as if the house itself has not forgotten the night I trespassed in thought and curiosity. Even writing this now, the memory presses against me. I can feel the chill, the small, deliberate echoes of footsteps, the lingering presence that refuses to vanish. Some nights I imagine the basement door slowly creaking open, a shadow descending, the soft, insistent cry carrying up to me once more. The world outside may seem ordinary, the road quiet, the mountains still, but the memory of that locked basement stays with me, a patient, inescapable dread lodged deep in my chest. I will never go back. I will never see what lies below. And yet, In the quiet of the night, I cannot help but feel it is still there, waiting, patient, undisturbed, and somehow aware of me, even from behind the thick, forbidding door. I remember that evening like a slow, creeping weight settling over the house. I had just finished putting Tommy to bed upstairs and had come down to make a small snack for myself. Something simple, peanut butter on bread, a glass of water, and the kitchen felt unusually cold. The old Appalachian house had that familiar scent of wood polish and lingering dinner aromas, but there was something off, something almost imperceptible pressing in around me. As I reached for a plate, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping across the floor. My hand froze midair, my heart jumping in my chest. I reminded myself that I was alone, that Tommy was upstairs asleep, that the house often made creaking noises. But this wasn't the usual groan of timber settling or a draft blowing against the windows. This was deliberate, a movement that seemed too purposeful to ignore. I turned slowly, scanning the kitchen. The room appeared empty. The chairs were tucked neatly under the table, the lights steady, the counter clear. And yet the sensation of being watched pressed against me like a weight in my chest. I could feel it brushing past me in the air, something close but unseen, as though a presence moved in the peripheral edges of my vision. The refrigerator hummed softly, then clicked open, its light spilling onto the linoleum floor, though I had not touched it. My pulse spiked. I stepped back, my fingers gripping the edge of the counter for stability, trying to convince myself that it was nerves, exhaustion, or the shadows playing tricks in the lamplight. But the cold, the deliberate scraping, and the subtle rustle in the air told me otherwise. I whispered Tommy's name, hoping to anchor myself to something tangible, something real, but the house answered with silence. And then from just behind me came the softest sound of deliberate breathing, slow, measured, unhurried, almost teasing. I spun around, eyes wide, but there was nothing. Nothing tangible, only the oppressive sense that I was not alone, that someone had slipped past the thresholds of the house without leaving a trace. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run up the stairs, lock the doors, and never look back. But the thought of Tommy sleeping alone upstairs kept me rooted, trying desperately to rationalize what I couldn't. The lights flickered, subtle at first, then more insistently, casting long, shifting shadows across the counters and cabinets. I could feel the air moving around me as though something had passed by my shoulders, close enough to brush the sleeve of my shirt. Every shadow seemed to pulse with the shape of someone waiting, just beyond perception, patient and deliberate. I tried to focus on my breathing, on keeping calm, but each sound, the soft scrape of a chair leg, the whisper of movement near the pantry, set my nerves on edge. I realized with mounting terror that this presence was waiting, observing, learning the rhythms of the house and of me. I moved cautiously, placing my hand on the doorknob leading to the hallway, preparing to retreat upstairs. As I pivoted, the refrigerator door swung open slightly, the soft hum of the light a sudden intrusion into the oppressive quiet. I reached forward, steadying myself against the counter, and the door clicked closed on its own, the darkness swallowing the small rectangle of light. My pulse raced, my skin crawled. I felt as though the house had grown smaller, the ceiling lower, the walls pressing in around me, and the presence had occupied every corner simultaneously. I whispered again, calling Tommy's name, and this time the sound seemed to provoke movement, a faint scuffing on the tiles, deliberate, echoing in the otherwise still room. I could feel the gaze even without seeing it, something precise and human, calculated and patient. I tried to imagine who or what could have entered the house, and the only thing that fit was a person, a drifter, a wanderer, someone familiar with the forests surrounding the Appalachian valleys, someone capable of slipping in unnoticed, patient enough to watch and wait without detection. The thought chilled me more than the shadows themselves. Time stretched, minutes becoming hours. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of a chair, every flutter of the curtains in the slight breeze carried a threat I could not name. I moved slowly around the kitchen, checking cabinets, peering under counters, but nothing appeared out of place. Yet I could feel the presence, still patient, still deliberate, as if it were aware of every movement I made, measuring my reactions, feeding on the tension it had cultivated. I could not leave. I was frozen in place, afraid of what I might provoke if I moved too quickly. afraid of leaving Tommy alone upstairs if I left the room entirely. Eventually, I sank to the floor, back pressed against the lower cabinets, heart hammering, listening to the house breathe around me. The presence did not move in a way I could see, but I could feel it in the subtle brush of air against my arm, the faint pressure in my chest, the lingering warmth of eyes on me from somewhere unseen. The hum of the refrigerator, the gentle whir of the ceiling fan, even the creak of the old timbers became accomplices to the sense that I was being observed, evaluated, catalogued in ways I could not comprehend. When the parents finally returned, I was pale, trembling, clutching a glass of water as though it could shield me from the memory of the night. The kitchen appeared ordinary, chairs neatly tucked, refrigerator closed, lights steady. I said nothing of the scraping, the whispers, the subtle movements that had pushed me to the brink. I tried to smile, tried to laugh off my own terror, and the parents did not notice anything unusual, unaware that their home had been temporarily inhabited by a patient, unseen guest. Even leaving the house, the memory lingered. I could feel it, somehow imprinted in the space of the kitchen, the corners and thresholds, the subtle rhythm of the floors. I did not return to babysit there again. I avoid thinking of the house, avoid imagining the way that presence might move through empty spaces, waiting for the next unwary soul. Even now, years later, the sensation returns when the wind rattles windows or the shadows pool oddly in the corners of rooms. I can feel it, subtle but deliberate, as though the house remembers me and my intrusion, as though it carries the memory of my presence and of that patient watcher with it. The encounter has stayed with me, a quiet Appalachian dread lodged in my chest. I do not know if it was human, or how it moved, or why it chose that night to make itself known. I only know that it was deliberate, patient, and impossibly human in its manner. The house, the kitchen, the shadows themselves are ordinary to anyone else, but I carry the knowledge of that night, of the unseen guest who watched, who waited, who occupied the space without being seen. And sometimes when the house is still and the night presses against the walls, I can feel it again, waiting patiently, deliberate and unhurried, reminding me that some presences are quiet, human, and inescapable. I remember that night with a clarity that makes my chest tighten even now. It was unusually cold for early spring, the kind of night where the wind slips through the trees and carries the damp chill straight into your bones. The parents had left me to babysit little Emma in the living room while they attended a late dinner at the neighbors. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels thick, almost tactile, pressing against your skin and your thoughts. I had been reading a book on the couch, Emma curled up beside me, her small hands clutching a worn blanket, eyes drooping with sleep. Outside, the wind rustled the budding leaves, but I thought little of it until I heard the first cry, a faint, plaintive sound, distant and soft, almost swallowed by the night. At first, I thought it might be a child from a nearby house, some neighbor lost in the dark, but when I strained my ears, it was unmistakable that the cries were coming from the yard, circling, shifting, impossible to place. I rose slowly and moved to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. The yard was shrouded in darkness, trees stretching their limbs into the night, casting long, wavering shadows across the grass. The cries continued, low and sorrowful, then rising in pitch as if growing impatient with my scrutiny. My heart began to pound, each beat echoing in my ears. While a cold awareness settled over me, something was out there, moving, watching, circling the house in a way that made no sense. I tried to calm myself, rationalizing that the wind, the trees, or perhaps some stray animal was responsible. But the cadence of the cries was unmistakably human, or close enough to make my mind latch onto that notion. Emma stirred beside me, mumbling something about someone being outside. I knelt to comfort her, whispering reassurances I didn't feel, trying to keep my voice steady. The cries intensified, circling again, rising in urgency, sending a chill crawling up my spine. Every instinct told me to check the doors, lock the windows, and make sure no one had slipped inside. But the house felt impossibly quiet. The normal creaks and groans of timber absent, replaced by the patient, deliberate weight of the night pressing in. I tried calling the parents, my fingers fumbling with the phone, but the line was dead. My breath caught in my throat, and the quiet of the house felt heavier, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The cries seemed closer now, moving methodically around the outside of the house, lingering by each window for a moment before drifting just out of sight. I could see shadows passing in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing. I wanted to scream, to shake Emma awake and run for the car, but I was rooted in place, as though the weight of the unseen presence kept me locked in the living room. Minutes stretched, the cries ebbing and rising, sometimes soft, almost pleading, sometimes urgent and insistent. I could feel a rhythm to it, a slow, calculated movement that no ordinary human would attempt, as though whoever, or whatever, was outside was deliberately pacing, observing, testing. I moved cautiously to the front door, checking locks, peering through the peephole. The yard appeared empty, ordinary, silent. And yet, the cries resumed almost immediately, rising from the side yard, shifting like a deliberate dance just beyond my perception. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Every nerve screaming and warning. I could not leave Emma alone upstairs. And yet the house felt smaller, tighter, as if the unseen visitor had expanded into every corner, occupying space beyond physical reality. I whispered reassurances to her, telling her it was the wind, that it was nothing, though the tremor in my own voice betrayed the terror gnawing at me. I checked the back windows, the kitchen, the hallways, all ordinary, all normal. And yet the cries continued, circling, patient, deliberate. Each one carried a sense of urgency and calculation, like someone with infinite patience, moving silently, just outside the range of vision. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed in that state of taut awareness. I dared not move too quickly, dared not open the door, dared not disturb the delicate balance of observation I had with the night. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the whistle of wind through the siding, the faint rustle of leaves, was amplified, signaling possible movement, possible threat. I felt the presence in a way I cannot fully describe, a combination of weight in the air, pressure against my chest, and the impossible sensation of being observed by something patient, deliberate and unhurried. Eventually, the first hints of dawn broke across the horizon. The cries faded, retreating into the distance as if the unseen visitor had grown bored or satisfied with its vigil. I dared to step outside, the yard cold and empty, dew wetting my shoes, no sign of footprints, no evidence of who or what had circled the house in the night. Emma slept on the couch, her small chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of sleep, unaware of the terror that had pressed against us. The parents arrived shortly after, cheerful and unaware, interrupting the lingering tension that hung in the air. I smiled, said nothing, and went home that morning with my nerves frayed, heart still pounding. Even now, years later, I remember that night as though it were pressing against my chest. I cannot forget the sound of the cries, the deliberate pacing around the house, the invisible presence that occupied the yard with patience and intent. The memory lingers, quiet and heavy, pressing in during still nights, in moments when the wind carries sounds that might be ordinary. I know that what I heard was real, grounded in human form, deliberate and intentional, even if I never saw anyone or anything. The Appalachian night holds many secrets, and some of them are patient enough to wait, circling, watching, teaching you that the world is larger and stranger than you imagine. That night left a permanent mark on me, a quiet dread lodged in my chest that has never left. I avoid that road, that house, and even thinking about it brings a cold tightness that reminds me of the unseen visitor. The cries were human but deliberate, patient and impossible to anticipate. They are lodged in my memory, a presence I can feel even when the world is ordinary. The night may pass, the wind may settle, and the house may appear normal, but I know the truth. Someone or something was there, circling, watching, waiting. And the knowledge of it, the memory of that night, presses against me still, a quiet, inescapable Appalachian dread that will never leave.